sudden you realize, I don't think this is the right road. Have you ever been in a situation like that? Often couples can get into arguments. That was the time before the GPS. Now we can just push the buttons and it tells us where to go. But in the past, husbands and wives or partners would look at the maps and have conflicting dialogues about where to drive and how to get there. The solution can often be quite simple. Turn around and go back. This is easy enough in a car, but it raises an interesting question. Is it possible in our lives to turn around? Can we turn around, our lives around, or must we keep going in one direction as if, well, I made a wrong turn and now I have to keep going on the path. I guess that's my fate. Jesus tells the most significant story in Luke's Gospel. It's not brand new to you. It's one of the most loved stories, I would say, of the New Testament. Perhaps I would say it is the story in the entire New Testament that if we didn't hear any other story from Jesus' lips, this story would be the one we need to hear. It is a story uncovering the true character of God and the human possibility of return. I'd like us to hear Luke 15, verses 1 to 3 and 12 to 32, and I'll be reading from the New Living Translation. Luke 15, the first 3 verses, and then 12 through 32. Tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. This made the Pharisees and teachers of religious law complain that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. So Jesus told them the story. A man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, this younger son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land, and there he wasted all his money in wild living. About the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have food enough to eat and to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. So he returned home to his father. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming, and filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son and embraced him and kissed him. His son said to him, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. But his father said to the servants, Quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get the ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast. For this son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now is found. And so the party began. Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working, and when he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house. And he asked one of the servants what was going on. Your brother is back, he was told, and your father has killed the fattened calf. We are celebrating because of his safe return. The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, All these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to do. And in all the time you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet when this son of yours comes back, after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fattened calf." His father said to him, "Look, dear son, you have always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found." Young people tend to think that life is unlimited in time and in choosing what to do with that time. You ever think back, for those of us who are a little over being young anymore, that time is unlimited? There's always going to be time to do stuff. And often there's a longing, too, for experimentation, a readiness to do something totally different. We are right here in this story in the midst of a family situation where the youngest son is longing for a change. He's ready to step over boundaries. He wants to leave the scene with or without parental approval. And to help himself get away, he makes a rather daring choice. He tells his father, and I think that's an interesting thing in this text, he doesn't ask his father. The text here in the New Living Translation says, he tells his father, "I want my share now." Whew. I want my share now. That feels rather demanding, doesn't it? I don't know how you would feel if somebody came up to you and said, "I want my share now." Many of us would say, you can think what you want, but you ain't getting it. It somehow feels inappropriate. Usually a parent dies before the kids divide up the inheritance. The listeners in Jesus' day must have been shocked by this. Who in the world would do that? That would never happen. What is amazing to me in this story, the father goes along with the son's demand. The father agrees. We don't see anything of emotion here one way or another with the father. He divides up his estate. He allows the son to leave. And it's interesting here, the father is not angry. He may be sad, but he doesn't hinder his son from making a choice to leave and go far away. What the story quickly reveals is that the son was not suited for wild living. I think that's interesting. He goes off and he seems to be almost exploited by the people around him, or he doesn't quite know how to manage his money. He seems rather naive, partying and using up his resources, and at the end of the day, he simply gives everything away, and now his choice to leave turned into a life of want and sheer misery. When he had made his choice to leave home, he had been in circumstances where he had had no worries. Have you ever had a time in your life when you had no worries? I think often as children we had times like that. I never worried about some things. I sometimes worried if my mother was angry at me. Come to find out later she was not angry with me. She just looked like she was angry at me, and I always wondered, are you angry with me? I mean, that was the kind of thing I spun around about. But I was actually had a good thing going at home. My parents were there for me, and I really didn't have worries like many kids have. And many of us could say, yes, I've had some of that. Maybe some of you didn't have that in your childhood, but you maybe had it down the road at some place where you didn't have to worry. And this young son really had been in circumstances where he could just enjoy life. He was safe. And from a position of abundance or of having enough, it's easy to say, I want something else. Isn't this like many of us, and isn't this like our world right now? People are dissatisfied with how life is at the moment. Although for many people, life is very good. But dissatisfaction can come in even when we don't have any worries. We just get kind of bored with good things. I've sometimes thought, and I think I've mentioned this before, that I even wonder in Europe if having so many years of peace, over 70 years, if people aren't just a bit bored with peace. Isn't war a little more exciting? There's more action on the streets. I kind of wonder. But the Son, now, in this moment, has to think about choices a bit differently. The Son's original choice was made out of circumstances that were in his favor. And now, down the road, his choice is overshadowed by other circumstances. And this is interesting. Our choice is one thing, the circumstances are something else. We can maybe make choices, but we can't control circumstances. His choice is overshadowed now. As a result of his leaving, he was losing everything he had. And the choice he made to go away was now influenced further by factors outside of his influence. Nobody can control drought. Nobody can control hunger. Nobody can control inadequate work. I've been reading a book, started reading a book about Tambora that I got for my birthday, about the big volcano in 1815 that exploded up into the stratosphere and affected the world climate around the world. So that people in Europe, it was dark. There was no harvest for several summers and people began to be hungry. Same happened in Switzerland. People in India were affected, and around the world because of one volcanic eruption that went way up into the stratosphere. But those kind of situations, you have no control over that, do you? But circumstances that we don't have under control still force us to rethink life. And so this son who made an original choice to leave when the circumstances were good for him has to now confront the fact that all the circumstances have changed and he needs to rethink what in the world he's going to do next. How did I end up here? He asked himself. How did I end up in a pig pen? And his decision here to turn around, there were the push factors of all these circumstances, drought, hunger, lousy work, and the pull factors. He remembers home. He remembers home. He reflects on how everyone lived on his father's farm. Life away from the Father was lonely and had become very, very hard. How did I get here? And now a choice to change directions and turn around actually begins always with serious rethinking. How do we turn around? And that's a question actually that Linda raised. How do I get out of this? Do I need to rethink where I'm at? And that happens to all of us. A rethinking has to take place before we can return. This young man made a plan. It was clearly not as easy as the original plan to leave home, but he decides, I must swallow my pride. I am unworthy to be a son any longer. I have to accept this loss of status as a son. And I will simply go home and say to my father, I am no longer your son. you can just chuck me out of your family page. Let me just be a servant. It's okay, Dad. Just allow me to come home. And with this practiced resolve, this young man turns and returns home. Now, already Jesus is telling his audience the possibility of changing relationship with the Father is there. Reconsideration of where we are, what has happened, where we want to be, all of that can lead to a return. Clearly, this young man fits the categories of notorious sinners. Remember, the whole text began when Jesus was hearing the commentary of those religious people who said, how can you sit down with notorious sinners and tax collectors and all these stupid people? In another text, they are called scum. How can you sit down with scum? This young man in the story clearly fits the category that they were condemning. So the religious leaders are onto the story right now, and the people around Jesus at the table where Jesus had often been had made the choices too to go down a different path. But when Jesus showed up, you know what happened? All of those folk turned around. Jesus showed them the love of the Father and explained how much the Father cared for them, and they turned around and sat down with Jesus and loved the fellowship with him at the table. Which is not where this story's going. And you have to get the audience here. You have these people that don't like Jesus sitting down with those people. And now Jesus is telling this interesting story about some of the dynamics that they've been just criticizing. That's always an interesting thing. The audience probably agrees with what the son says. I have lost my status, I am unworthy, and I must just be a servant. They probably all said, yep, that's the conclusion we come to too. He's a louse, he's out, he's not any longer a son, he's a servant. And probably everyone agrees up to now with the story. And this is where the centerpiece parable of Jesus takes a whole different turn itself. The young man who practices this I am sorry speech, and I think he has to practice it as he walks all the way home. Father, I am no longer your son. Father, I am no longer your son. I am a servant. He practices that. He doesn't even consider that the Father would be anything but angry. He draws the conclusion, like all the hearers in the story, yes, the Father will be angry, and you're a louse now, and you're not on the family page. You will be judged. He was ready to hear the words, you are not right, you are unworthy, you are no longer a son. And this is where the unbelievable turn in his return comes. The Father is waiting for him. He has been looking for him. He has been hoping that he would return and rethink what he did and come home. And the Father sees him coming across the field. And what does he do? And now you can imagine the audience that Jesus is telling the story to. They're thinking, okay, now comes the punchline. The dad's going out and the kid's going to get it just like it has to be. The audience is ready. Anger's going to fall. But the Father runs to the Son, and what does he do? He embraces him. He embraces him. He gives him a word of love and compassion. He is not angry and he's not judgmental. And not only that, the Father reinstates him to his original position as son. The dead has been raised. The lost has been found, and a party starts. A reason for a party is when the lost have been found. Jesus said everybody should throw a party when anybody comes into the kingdom. We ought to practice that more. That means we need to see more people coming into the kingdom so we can have a party. The unsettling part of the story is that the older son ends up being angry and judgmental. Wasn't that how the Pharisees and teachers of the law were as they saw Jesus eat with tax collectors and other notorious sinners? How could you eat with him? How can the father take his lousy son back into the family? How does God deal with such people who have left? Jesus is saying God is like the father in this story. His loving embrace takes all in who return. And you know what? The older son could have returned and turned as well. He wasn't stuck in the position he put himself in. And the question at the end of the story is, does this second son ever turn? We don't know. We don't know. But in the distance, as the second son is thinking about being angry and judgmental, we hear the music. We hear shouts of joy. He's back. Isn't that wonderful? And all the people said, Amen. Amen. Let's pray. Oh Lord, how wonderful it is that you love us and embrace us when we turn and come home. Oh Lord, we pray by your Spirit that you'll help all who maybe feel like they've run away to return to you. There's great joy, O Lord, in heaven for all those who turn around and come home. We thank you for this beautiful story. Thank you for telling it, Jesus. It has impressed the generations, and it keeps on speaking